you're working on specifically to address the changes of technology and the voting process. And so we've hinted and talked a little bit about the app that you've been working on, but start off by reintroducing your app that you've been building and launched, and tell us about it.
Yeah, so as you know, as we've been talking about, if you're a regular listener of the podcast, we've been talking about this project I've been working on called Next Up City Guide Voter. We have officially launched. We are on the Apple App Store, and it will be available Election Day for use in Harris County only. And we show all of the voting locations and their wait times. We also have a special location message feature where we can put other information that's relevant to a specific voting location. So for example, if there are any voter suppression tactics reported there, voter intimidation, or any other information like maybe there's road closures, that things that would not appear anywhere else on Google or any other news platform, then we can have it there for the voters who need that information before they leave the house. That is the whole goal. Provide people with information so that they can make the best decision on where to go on election day.
I think that is so cool. So how did you come up with this idea? Because coming up with ideas is one thing, and I've built a bunch of apps and experienced it. It's easy to come up with an idea. It's extremely difficult to execute and deliver. So walk us through, how did you come up with the idea, and then how did you actually make the commitment to build this thing?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question and framing it that way, because I think that is probably the biggest lesson I've learned. It has taken a year to get to this point, and it is not because of the idea itself is difficult to execute on. It's just there's a lot to consider when you're building an app, and this is really my first time building an app for iPhone. And when I started off, it really was just an idea. About a year ago, I was thinking about an experience I had at work where I was a participant in a design sprint, and we had a very clear customer in mind. We were looking at trying to build an app for low-income millennials, and the idea was that they needed a digital-first solution for healthcare. And I remember as a participant in that, I thought, I have a very unique perspective here, and I keep challenging the thinking that's in the room, and I thought, I could put that into something myself. And one day I was kind of just sitting around and I was thinking about wait time a lot and how it seems to be a very pervasive feature of African-American life in particular. There's so much wait time built into things. And so I thought, what if I could address that? And I reached out to a friend of mine who I attended North Carolina A&T State University with, and we started to talk about this very specific use case, the barbershop, and how barbershops have a time management issue of their own that they're trying to solve for. And they usually use the appointment system to try to solve the time management issue. But even if you show up with an appointment, sometimes you're actually going to end up waiting. And so I thought, what if I could show someone what the wait time is before they ever left the house? So then they could get some time back, or they could make some different decisions about how they use their time, right? So Will liked that idea. And he's put me in touch with DeMarcus Kennedy, who is a software developer out of Austin. And he and I got to talking, and he said, okay, here's what we do. We can build this app, and we can test it, and we can continue to build from there. So that was in November of 2019. In January, we were able to meet in person in Austin on the campus of Houston-Tillotson University. That is an HBCU, the only one actually in Austin, and I think the only one in a major tech city. So I think that's also important to note. We were very intentional about really weaving in the African-American experience throughout this project. And when we met there, we talked more about the barbershop version of Next Up. And then we left there. We met again a second time in February at the African American Library in Houston, Texas. And we continued to build upon that. And then in March, as you know, pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, I started to think very differently about this app. And I said, as we've been building this, we've really been looking at wait time, and we're looking specifically at lines, why there are lines, how lines can be better managed. And during the pandemic, of course, there are lines everywhere in places that didn't have lines before. And so I started to think about how can I now adjust our model to suit this new use case. As that was happening, the primaries started to happen, and I started seeing these lines everywhere. And the one that stood out to me the most was here in Texas. In Houston, Texas, there's an HBCU called Texas Southern University. And if you go and Google it and learn the history of the school, and the short story is that the school was founded simply because the University of Texas, Austin, did not want to admit African Americans. So this, to me, is drawing a very long through line to where we are today. And so during the primary, Texas Southern University's polling station had a 7-hour reported wait time. That is ridiculous, absolutely unacceptable. And I said, you know what? I've got this app that I'm working on. It fits this use case too, and this is the one that I want to focus on because I want to help people right now in this election. So once again, I reached out to DeMarcus. I said, "Here we go. We're gonna flip this a little bit." But he was on board with it. He understood it, and I think that was really important too, right? Working with a Black developer who understands the experience. And then reaching out to creatives to help with the logo and even this artwork that you see behind me. All of these folks, they come from the same experience, understand the problem and why this limits voter participation. And while I recognized very early on that there was no way that I could impact in this election the drivers of the wait time and the long lines, what I could do is do something that hadn't been done at this point, which was to provide visibility to the wait time itself and to whatever polling condition data that I could get my hands on and push out to the voters. So I realized that that's a really big task. And to do it required people who understood. And I feel like that's why it's been successful. That's why a year later we are on the App Store. And I'm really excited about Election Day.
I'm really excited for you too. So before we started the show, you're like, Election Day is your Super Bowl, right? When it comes to this app. And so talk about, because I know you were worried that you weren't even going to be able to get it on the App Store before Election Day.
Yeah.
I want to know about that process, because getting an app on specifically the Apple App Store is not easy. It's time intensive.
Yeah.
What was that experience like? I'm sure it was scary and you were nervous through that whole process, but then it got approved pretty quickly, right?
It did. And we've actually sent an update, which also was approved very quickly. So we've been really lucky in that part because I knew we were cutting it close in terms of deadline. One thing that I have learned in the process of developing an app is that details matter. And there are a lot of little things that, maybe an ordinary user of the app might not even notice, but they matter a lot in terms of the user experience. And so I wanted to make sure I covered all of those details. So that was first. And I didn't want to release something that did not work. And I didn't want to release something that didn't meet my own standards for what I would expect in an experience. So there was that. And then getting on the App Store, we understood that the process could take as much as 2 weeks to get approved. And at the point at which we submitted the application, we were actually just shy of 2 weeks. So I thought to myself, what are we going to do if we don't actually make it to Election Day? But surprisingly, we were able to get approved. I think it was within 24 hours of submitting the app. I mean, it was really quick, much, much faster than I had anticipated. But the process leading up to that was new for both of us, right? So DeMarcus had never submitted an app to the App Store before, and neither had I. And so the application itself required some research to ensure that we met all of the requirements. And there are things that are really specific, such as spacing and where you, what type of language you can use, and do your photos match the actual app, and do you have photos that have screenshots for the iPad and also screenshots for the iPhone. I mean, they're very specific. And if you miss any one of these details, you get rejected. So the first go round, we made it through. The second go round, actually, we got rejected a couple of times because of our screenshots they weren't the right size. They didn't reflect the iPad version of the app. Like, there were these things that I just thought to myself, this isn't that big of a deal, but it matters to Apple. So learning Apple's process, I think, was good, and I'm glad we got through it. But yeah, I was for a while worried that, there was just going to be something that would hold us up that we wouldn't be able to fix in time.
Yep. And so you got it out. It's there. I know I have it on my phone, even though I'm not voting in Texas.
You do? I didn't know that.
I'm not going to download
That's awesome.
I'm
Thank you.
A review too. Anyone who's listening to this, please make sure you review your apps. But like the thing, how you support your friends is you got to use their products, right, and their services. So of course, yeah, it's going to download it. And anyone out there listening, please go find it there on the Apple App Store. I realized that there's a bunch of Next Up apps. Do Next Up Vote, and you'll find it right there at the top. Putting that vote word in there helped me a ton. And go ahead.
Oh, good. No, I was just saying good because that was one of the metadata tags that we put in there. We have to. That's another thing I had to learn about was what are the right tags, and then over time trying to test to make sure I've got the right ones in there. So it's a process. It's a lot. There's a process and a strategy.
So my other question for you, Mr. Well Traveled, is Tuesday's election day. What's your plan on Tuesday?
Yeah. So my plan. So right now, because Next Up is so new and it's everything that I've put effort into in the last year, my job right now is to focus on that and make sure that tool is working for the voters. I've created this for the voters in Harris County on Election Day. I wish I could have more counties on there, but right now, that's the scope. And one, I'm going to make sure that the app is functioning properly, that wait times are updated. And that is a task that is partially manual and partially automated. We are definitely making sure that we are in sync with the Harris County Votes website. So we don't want to be anywhere different than where they are. So that's one. Two, I personally will actually be entering the data for the location message feature. So I will be doing something that I'd never done before, but I think will be really useful to folks, trying to match up what's being posted on social media with the voting locations. So that's one thing that I noticed in this whole process of trying to understand what's out there, how are people able to get the information that they need, is that there is a gap in very specific location based information. So I can generally find out online on Google or from a county website, like where my voting location is. And in some of them even have wait times. But if there was something like a road closure, that wouldn't be available. Or if there was something like voter intimidation reported, that wouldn't be on any of those other platforms. But maybe someone might post about it on Twitter or on Instagram. But right now, there's not really a way to link that back without a manual search. So that's what I'll be looking for out there in the location tags. And then I'll try to do a little bit of visual observation myself. I'm going to go out to some of the polling locations. I want to take a few photos. I want to share them on social media. Because the other thing that I realize is there are 800 plus voting locations in Harris County on Election Day. All of them will not be on the news. Some of them will be on the news. So what can I do to help folks who are going to be receiving information through social media? How to help them with a little bit more information? So I've got the Next Up City Instagram page set up, and I want people to go there, use it as a resource as well.
It's going to be a crazy day for you then. I'm sure that's going to be wake up early and stay up really late